The following program was produced by an independent community producer. The opinions expressed do not necessarily reflect those of the ECAT staff or board of directors.
Community Forum is sponsored by the Easton Grange 196 and a friend of Yardley Wood Rink and the Easton Lions Club.
There's a storm across the valley. The clouds are rolling in. The afternoon is heavy on your shoulders. There's a truck out on the 4-lane, a mile or more away. The whining of his wheels just makes it colder.
Welcome to Community Forum. Today is October 6th, 2023. My name is Pricilla Almquist Olsen, your host, and it gives me a great deal of pleasure to welcome back to the show Jamie Stebbins, council, who serves on the Select Council of Easton and doing an admirable job. And we're going to hear about that, what he does, how he does it, and what his vision is for the future for Easton. So welcome, Jamie.
Thank you. Thank you, Pricilla, for having me back after it's been 2 years.
I know, time flies, doesn't it?
It does, and we've done a lot.
I know, and you have been very busy. So tell us a little bit about your background to refresh people's recollection.
Sure. So, I ran for select board. It was back in 21, so spring of 21, and coming to Easton in 2009, and I've been raising a family here after about 11 years in the military, and then combined with some corporate work, and now been in the manufacturing sector for close to 20 years, and based out of Chicago. So I do a lot of time between consulting and then obviously at the office in Chicago and then office here in Easton too. Mm-hmm. So, between raising 3 children and working on the select board now and several committees like Green Communities Committee and Municipal Buildings Committee, Budget Subcommittee.
Well, I want you to, I'm going to have you back. Oh, we'll talk a little bit about the Green Communities, because Christina Refford, who's the chair, she's coming to the Grange in November and going to speak and share the projects and mission of the Green Communities Committee. So, okay, so you have been on the board for 2 years. And when you started, what was it like? Was there a learning curve?
There was. And I know I talked a little bit about it back then. It was a bit daunting. We were, myself and Jennifer Stacy were new and having come from the finance committee, some of our mentors had told us, hey, you're going to find that learning curve straightens out pretty quickly because you know more than you realize. And while I found that to be true, there's so many wonderful things going on in town and so many projects and committees to be involved with that the curve continued to be pretty steep, but certainly have found my way, somewhat found my niche, especially with the municipal buildings project.
So let's talk about the Green Communities. All right.
You mentioned one of my favorite people, Christina Refford. So I'm just going to say, thanks to Christina, that committee has been a real pleasure to be a part of.
And what compelled you to become a member of that committee?
So I'm an appointed member. I'm not, meaning I'm the select board appointee.
Right.
So when we sit down every year, we go over the committees that require an appointee. The other one was budget subcommittee, mm-hmm. where it's a little bit different for the municipal buildings committee because I'm actually I'm voting members on all, but that one I'm a part of the full process. So when I looked, I didn't know Christina at the time. I knew that Craig Barger, mm-hmm. my colleague on the select board, had been with that and spoke glowingly about it and really didn't want to give it up to me. But I said, Craig, I'd love exposure to the Green mm-hmm. Communities Committee. And I've heard so many great things that he'd done. He was kind enough to say, all right, Jamie,
you can have it.
You can have it. So I was lucky. Craig was kind. And I've been over there now since being elected and appointed shortly thereafter to Green Communities Committee. And Christina is one of the most thoughtful, because I'm utilizing her as the reference for all this because it's her leadership. It's what I become is a liaison between the select board and Green Communities Committee. But she's really the one that brings the ideas and says, and now has recruited some other wonderful members that have been brought onto the board.
Tell us some of the projects.
So they've worked on the plastic bag ban was a big one before I even came on board, which you see that's catching fire, right? Across the state and across other states. It's often things that aren't popular initially, right? It's not popular to mean that I have to remember my bag when I go into the store, but then we realize some of the benefits that we reap environmentally by doing that.
Right.
There's been some great state energy work that Christina's kind of looked for grants and said, hey, have we applied for this? And then she'll tip off the DPW, who's really the one that drives us. Now that we are considered a green community, that's a designation we've been given due to some of the work we've done. DPW really helps drive that and make sure that our buildings stay within the requirements of these audits. Christina, I should have come a little bit more prepared. She has several things. She was just at the NRT, had our booth there, and I know that she's been proactively looking at future energy costs and how many of us in Easton are signed up for renewable, what we pay basically for renewables, and right now it's almost at parity. So if you want to check off that all of your energy is, you're paying for renewable energy, you have the opportunity to do that, and today it's almost the same cost. The real savings has been, and I give Connor a lot of credit for this, he has entered into contracts that the town has reaped serious benefits. I think it saved Easton taxpayers over $8 million just last year because because we were in a long-term contract versus what the actual rates were. So we were significantly below that.
Yes, and I certainly benefited because my electric bill just skyrocketed, and I discovered the Eastern contract, and it was wonderful. It came right down to a reasonable amount.
Yeah.
And so it's
things
important.
Like that, and Christina's been a huge champion of recycling.
Now, but let's go back to the energy, the electricity, because a lot of people I've been reading online, they're complaining about $200, $300, even $400 a month in electricity. So people out there, go to the town website and take a look and find what the current package is that's been negotiated by the select board, and so that you can sign up and get the reduced benefit. It's certainly well worth it.
Yeah.
So, okay, go ahead.
Yeah, I would just say, so from recycling, a lot of us, including myself, do wish cycling, right? Like, it's plastic, you want it to be recyclable. And unfortunately, so Christina took the next, so she's looking at what our, for all the recyclables that leave town, if there's contamination, we often get charged back for that, or, so Waste Management kind of keeps a scorecard or a record. And so Christina said, well, let's go tour Waste Management. Let's go to their facility where they actually recycle. And she brought I wasn't able to make it that time, but she had the rest of the Green Communities Committee go. And they got to do not only a tour of the Waste Management recycling plant, but ask questions and find out, how can our community do better? How can we educate our community? And what is acceptable and what's not? And then she brought that back and started, and that's what she did at the NRT, which she'll go through. And she has a wonderful program where she talks about what can be recycled and what can't and why it can't.
Yeah, so can you tell our listeners and viewers where that information is available?
Yeah, so the Green Communities Committee also has a website driven through the Easton. So if you go to the easton.ma.us, which is our town website, go under committees, boards and committees, find Green Communities Committee, and they can link right to our website. And,
Great,
and find
wonderful. Okay, because I think people don't understand the numbers on, the 2s, the 4s, the 5s, what they represent. And also, I was amazed that some people just don't realize that they have to clean out, if they're having tomato sauce in a glass jar, you don't just throw it in the recycle. You wash that tomato sauce right out of that glass.
Yeah, and that's changed, right? And a big reason was we used to be able to recycle just about anything. It was all heading overseas. So it would get on a barge,
right,
and that's changed. No longer are our recyclables, especially if they have any contamination, like you're talking about, if they're dirty at all, they're not being accepted anymore. So there's a much higher rate of not acceptance. So we've that's changed, and so our habits have had to change,
right,
to make sure we clean it, and make sure, like you said, it's got the proper number and it's recyclable.
Yeah.
Otherwise, it's contaminated and it gets rejected.
Okay. And my understanding is that if you have one contaminated item in your recyclables, the whole thing is contaminated. Is that still the case?
You know, I will say that waste management does a really good job of kind of weeding that out. So I don't think that is the case anymore. I think it may have been at one time, but what they are looking out for, though, is how many times are they finding rejectables in our, in our waste stream, because that's when we're going to start to get docked.
So what are the plans for the future for the Green Communities Committee?
Christina is working on a number of things. Water is important to all of us, right? And water conservation, and just knowing that we all realize the future means less and less clean water for everybody. And so with that, we need to be better stewards of it. So she thinks very much about that, and what are contamination points, what are areas that we can, help to, because we're really in an educational, we're not a policy-driven group, right? That committee is really all about educating. Policy would be driven through the select board. And it's driving those initiatives, getting people to think more about what goes into the water. What do we, from the clothes that we wear to the detergents that we use to, you name it, right? And we won't get into PFAS because that's a whole nother, there's a lot going on there. We can talk about it. It wouldn't be the Green Community's purview, but they're thinking about how do we stop contamination.
Now I know, but PFAS, the treatment plant, when is that coming online?
So it's online.
Oh, it is?
It is. So wells 1, 2, 4, which were the affected wells, that just to refresh everybody as well, the federal government standard hasn't changed yet. It will eventually change to no detectable amount of PFAS is healthy for us, and that's what they said. But for a long time, it was 70 parts per trillion. The state matched that. And then a few years ago, the state dropped down to 20 parts per trillion. That's when we found we had 3 wells that fell outside of that. I think we were in the 30, 34 parts per trillion. So we began the project of putting these remediation filtration, point-of-use filtration at each of these wellheads, affected wellheads. So they are online now. So the other thing that Director Field and the team is doing, and they had been doing, and I actually just learned about this recently, they were already thinking about getting below 20 parts per trillion, which is fantastic, because they said, look, at the time, they said, let's look into filtration technology that can beat that, because we know, and then like 6 or 7 months later, the federal government comes out and says, we're going to go below that, right? At some point, we want no detectable amount. It just, to me, says a lot about the people that we have working for us that are very thoughtful, very progressive, saying, let's stay ahead of this. Let's forward engineer these plants to do better than what the state requirement is, because at some point we're going to be asked to do better.
Now, you know that Dr. Kyla Bennett has stood up at town meetings many times, and so have I, on the issue of PFAS. Some years back, the PFAS that was in the artificial turf, we managed on the first vote to defeat it. And then the guy who had raised a lot of money got up and gave this impassioned speech, passionate speech, and the vote was reconsidered and passed. So that is, I'm wondering, is that PFAS, artificial turf, is that still on the high school grounds?
It's the same one, because I think I wasn't there, but I know of what you're talking about. So it is, and I think that all artificial turf is, everyone's looking closer at what does that mean environmentally, and what are other alternatives, which we know there's so many nuances, right? It's difficult because in some cases it's cost prohibitive, or it requires a significant maintenance budget to be able to maintain. So what I like is the conversation is growing, and it's growing. And other communities and everyone's starting to say, well, let's look closely at.
Well, the point is that it's very dangerous, and it's interesting because it's cancer producing, and the statistics show, believe it or not, that goalies for soccer goalies have the highest incidence of cancer. And that makes sense because they're always rolling on the turf, and it gets into permeates the skin, and that's how they become cancer. They have cancer. It's just amazing. And that statistic is out there. And so you don't want your kids rolling in this from an early age, continuing on from kindergarten to seniors. So I think that's a problem. I would like to see the Green Communities Committee tackle that and go back to real grass, and so.
My only concern, when we look at real grass too, is what goes into that grass to keep it green and keep it playable, right? Especially with the amount of abuse and wear and tear it takes so often fertilizers.
Yeah, well,
Which,
but aren't there? I'm sure there were green fertilizers, and there were things that can be done. And for years, I mean, when I was a kid growing up here in Easton, I mean, we never had a problem. We didn't have anybody getting cancer from rolling in the grass. So I don't know. Well, anyway, it's a topic for future discussion.
Yeah, and it's certainly one to educate ourselves more about, including myself, about the information available.
Well, one thing at a recent town meeting, Dr. Bennett got up and she talked about getting a provision in the vote, an amendment to the vote, that no PFAS be in any of the playground of the new Blanche Ames School, any of those playground items that would be put there, including the grass or anything, toys or climbing equipment. And we got it passed. And I got up too and I said, think about your, I'm a grandmother, think about your grandkids, And so we did succeed on that, and I was very proud and pleased. So anyway, but so you're going to be continuing on the Green Communities.
Yeah, at least we it's every year we come back up. So June, I believe, is when I was reappointed. So now that would be if I run. So I'm actually going to be up for election next year. So haven't made a decision. We all have to make decisions by January if we're going to pull papers to run again. So.
Well, I do hope you do. I mean, you've done a wonderful job. You're very hardworking. You're very sincere, and you ask the questions, and you're a critical thinker, and we need people who are critical thinkers.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, so I appreciate that, and so does the community. So best of luck to you. Any parting comments that you want to make about your job as a select board member?
Yeah, I'll just say again, thank you to all of our department heads and Connor Reed for the very thoughtful leadership and the work that they're doing on so many fronts, right? We brought sewer now, and that's another reason that the municipal project is even a possibility, is we have on the site that we're looking at the opportunity to connect to sewer, something we didn't have. The town kind of missed that boat back in the 60s and 70s when sewer was being widely, subsidized by state and federal funds, and we passed up on that opportunity. And because of that, we're going to pay a bit more now to, push these initiatives that require sewer, including bringing more commercial businesses and having the ability to do that with the connection of sewer. And so we see 3 different areas now where we have it. And the growth and great things that are starting to happen. So
are we bringing businesses, or are we bringing apartment buildings?
Well, you see Volkswagen dealership, we just had a groundbreaking this week,
Really?
right on 138. So there's a new business which is going to employ a number of people. I think that was...
Where's that located?
Right, Depot and 138 off on, so if you're heading north on 138, it's on the left where they've now just cleared.
That area, I was wondering what that was going to be. So that was a mall, and now it's going to be a Volkswagen dealership.
Yeah.
Terrific. That's exactly what we need, because dealerships don't have children to go to the school system to raise our taxes.
Yeah.
And also the 20%, when are we going to reach that? I know that's the goal, 20% commercial, in order to raise the tax rate. Because right now the commercial tax rate is identical to the residential. And we have to, that 20%, how close are we to getting there?
That's a good question. One that I'll be prepared to answer either next time or when we talk again. But
Okay.
but yeah, so there's a lot of good work being done in these districts. And I'll say I know from where you come in terms of school enrollment, but again, we've seen a decline even since 2009. We've continued to see a decline in school enrollment. Part of that, Pricilla, too, I think, is when we look back to the financial crisis of 2009, 2010, 2008, right, was you had a lot of middle income earners that took it really the brunt of that. And you see the people having less children, quite frankly, because it's so expensive too. And I speak from personal, I know this, right? But so those numbers continue to decline, and I don't think that's going to come back anytime real soon. So we need a good, responsible mix of residential, because people do need affordable homes too. We don't want to price everyone out of this town either, which is a concern. It's become tough. You're not going to find a starter home in Easton right now.
No, and to me, it's just amazing. Within the last 2 years, the prices of homes just skyrocketed.
It has, and it's due to lack of inventory, right? Where you've had just not enough. So there's a perfect storm. You have not enough building going on, so certainly way more demand than supply. But as interest rates went up, all those folks who would have been moving and maybe selling what they, a starter home, or making the next move to another home or into another community, with interest rates, they don't want to leave their mortgages that they have locked in at 2%, 3%, 4%.
Right, exactly.
To go to a 7.5% or 8% stops. So all of a sudden you see a real cooling down of the housing market for those reasons. And that's a perfect storm.
Yeah, and one of the bright sides to Easton's culture and landscape is that 38% of the landmass in Easton is in conservation. That is something we should be so proud of. And that had to do with the foresight of getting on for the Conservation Preservation Act when that came into being, I think, in the 70s. And we were one of the first towns to say yes and jump on board. And so that 3% surcharge on your taxes goes to building that up and permitting us to keep the farms in the family, and other people who don't want to sell to developers, but they do deserve the market value of their property. And so
I'm glad you brought that up. We have a really wonderful blend of preservation and progress in this town. And it's rare, it's unique, it makes Easton, it gives us the character, right? You look at I live in a home built in 1778. You and I have talked a little bit about that. And that, with it brings, there's a lot of money I put into the home that I'll never get out, but I'm a steward of it. And I tell my kids, it's funny because they're in the audience, is that we're custodians of this 245-year-old house. And it's our job to make sure we can pass it on and keep it standing. But there's a historical value to the town for folks like me who are willing to put money, sweat equity, and a lot of sweat. These kids do a lot of work out there. They all know how to do carpentry and have helped me do a lot around that home to keep it. And so you look at our building, you look at a lot of our historical buildings in town, and the same thing, that we put these resources in that give the character and the warmth and what we all love about Easton.
I forgot that you were in an 18th century house.
Yes, 1778, and it's the anchor home. It's the Joseph Hayward house. When they built it, they had 14 children, so they were known for rather large, and then several of the other homes after it became Hayward children homes. So we have that whole district. It's called the Hayward Pool District now, which recently became a historic district in town just in the last couple of years.
Oh, that's wonderful!
Isn't that something? So now these homes are preserved. They won't be able to be taken down, because that's part of the one piece that the historical commission really control you have is these homes cannot be torn down. Where a lot of people, and I don't fault them necessarily, but you'll buy this home, you'll tear it down and put an energy efficient, something that you can sustain long term, because you have a beautiful parcel of land in a beautiful town that you otherwise might not have been able to buy in. So this is what helps us preserve these homes.
Yeah, yeah. And Easton has a large share of that.
There is a well, Pricilla, on our property that was dug in 1717. So we have some wonderful historical records that came with the home. And I give credit to the Hayward family owned it right up until the 1950s. Then the McMullins. So that we're only the third family since the Hayward. So then it was the McMullins until 1999 when they sold it to the Rhinelanders, who sold it to us in 2009.
Wow.
So you've had these custodians who have done a wonderful job. But there was another house on this property that was moved. So it was built in the 1720s. That well from 1717 serviced it. They moved the house into our backyard. It was knocked over by a tornado in the 1800s. It was used, from what I understand, as like a tool shed and probably a workshop when it was moved. But then this home was erected in the 1770s that we're in today. So the amount of history, and there was a kiln that we have drawings of in the backyard, and we have some old photos that date back to when photography just became available in the late 1800s. So maybe from the 1870s, 1880s, some beautiful historic photographs. And also the Historical Society has a lot on the home too, and records, which is
well,
wonderful.
I think it would be wonderful if you agree that ECAT can do a tour. You can lead us on a tour of this historic house, because I think most people know about the Josiah Keith house. I did a tour of that.
You did recently, did you?
Yes, and so I think we need a tour of the Hayward house. What do you think?
I want to ask you, because you said you were in, it's the oldest house in Easton, right?
Yes, 1717.
It's the one on Bay Road, right? That beautiful yellow?
Yes, that mustard-colored yellow.
I love that color.
Mm.
I want to go, I would love to see that house sometime. How was your tour?
Oh, it was great. And you can see it on ECAT.
Perfect.
Just go to Easton Cat, one word, .org, and check on, you can find it, I probably was on my show Community Forum, but just the Josiah Keith house. And there's a young man who purchased it just in the winter, and Justin is a reenactor of the Revolutionary War. So he appears in his Revolutionary War outfit, and he's just so dedicated to the house. And he calls me his antique fairy, because I'm always dropping things off to him. I'm doing my Swedish death cleaning, and things that would be time typical for the house. And
wow.
So he's got, Crocs and all kinds of things. He even has a Lincoln rocker.
I will look for the video. I would love to see the video and see the walkthrough.
Yes. Well, listen, I'm sure that Justin would be delighted to have you as a guest.
Yeah.
And so he eventually wants to open it up to the town for people to tour. And he may be thinking of a bed and breakfast too, I don't know. But it's a wonderful house. And the color is a traditional historic colonial color, believe it or not. And the DeWayers, Melanie, who was chairman of the Historical Commission for decades, and her husband, they both unfortunately passed away at a very young age, but they really took such good care and had a wonderful stewardship of that place. So thank you for coming, Jamie.
Thank you for having me.
This is Pricilla. Almquist Olsen, your host. Be well.
Community Forum is sponsored by the Easton Grange 196 and a friend of Yardley Wood Rink and the Easton Lions Club.